Hello, this is Richard White with an Introduction to Spreadsheets, Part 4. In Part 3, we looked at using formulas in cells to quickly calculate results, and using fill across and fill down to extend those calculations to other sets of data. Here, in Part 4, we're going to see how to use Excel to create graphs or charts of our data. Before we discuss how to make a graph, we should be clear on why graphs are important. Graphs allow for the visual display of quantitative information, which lets us better see patterns or features in our data, which in turn lets us better understand that information. There are different types of charts which are suitable for different types of analysis: bar graphs, pie charts, scatter plots, etc. For our purposes here, we're going to be graphing the relationship between time and position for a ball rolling down a ramp. When comparing two related values like this in science, we almost always use an XY scatter plot, so that's what I'll be using in this presentation. Here's a data table that I've been working on with position time data for a ball rolling down a ramp. I've marked certain distances on the ramp and then timed how long it takes for a ball rolling down the ramp to reach that position. Because there may be some uncertainty in the data collection process, I've run 3 different trials, recorded that data, and used the spreadsheet to calculate an average time for each distance. Just examining the data, I can see a little bit of a pattern. When I compare the distances and the times here, it looks like the ball is taking less time to cover greater distances as it rolls, which I would certainly expect if the ball is speeding up. It's hard to tell exactly what kind of relationship it is, however, because my distances that I've chosen to measure aren't all the same. At first I went up by 0.1 meters, from 0 to 0.1 to 0.2, but then I went up by 0.2 meters, and then up by 0.4 meters, so it's harder to identify patterns in the data because of those values. This is the perfect situation for using a graph to better understand what's going on. Because I want to compare time and distance in my graph, which Excel also calls a chart, I'm going to need to put those 2 columns of data right next to each other. I don't want to mess up my data table here, so I'm actually going to copy the data from each of these columns into a new location on the sheet. Also, we almost always graph time on the x-axis, and Excel puts data from the first column onto the x-axis. Therefore, I need to make sure I put time in the first column. Let's do that now. Copy, paste. Whoa, what happened? I just wanted to take these numbers here and paste them down below, and that didn't happen at all. I'm going to undo what I just did there. And let's try to understand what went wrong. Remember that the numbers displayed in column E here aren't just values, they're calculations. Excel here reminds you that they're calculations with this little green highlight in the upper left corner. So when we copy-paste these cells, we're not getting the values, we're getting the calculations. And we can see if I try it again, and then look at what's contained in each of these cells, you can see that it's trying to average some cells, but it can't find what cells it's supposed to average. Remember, the original formula said, find the average of the 3 cells to the left. And in this location, there aren't any cells to the left. We have 2 solutions to this problem. One is to tell Excel, when I paste these numbers, I want the actual values and not the calculations. You can do that with the paste special command. Let's see that in action. I'll select the cells to be copied, copy them, and move to the new location where I want to paste those values. And choose not paste, but paste special. And here I'll indicate that I want just the values to be pasted, and you can see that it works quite nicely. I've got a bit of a problem here though. It occasionally happens that there's an error in a data table. What if I find out that this value, 0.88, was incorrectly entered and it's really 0.98? I'm going to go ahead and make that correction And you can see how amazing spreadsheets are. It has just automatically recalculated my new average based on that updated value. Oh, but look down here. When I pasted the values from the cells, I lost the connection between these two columns. There's an easy way to fix that, however. Just as each average cell here is based on the 3 cells to the left of it, I'm going to make each cell down here based on the contents of the cell up here. I'm going to enter into this first cell a formula that makes it equal to whatever is in the cell 5 columns over and 9 rows up. Now, if I make a change in one of my data entries, make this 0 a 2, for example, we can see that the average is updated in both columns. Now, how do I extend that calculation down on my spreadsheet? Remember that I can select a series of cells and fill down, and the cells will automatically be filled with calculations. Again, in this case, each cell is simply going to point to the cell that is 5 columns over and 9 rows up. So we now have our calculations occurring in 2 places on the table. Well, that was a lot of work to get that little column of calculated average times down there. In comparison, getting the measured distances copied down into the column just to the right is going to be very easy. This is a simple copy, paste. And now we have the 2 columns of data right next to each other. I'm going to quickly select these columns to adjust the significant figures for each one. Now, let's see how I go about actually having Excel create a graph for me. To create a graph for some data, begin by selecting the data. I'm going to click-drag to highlight the data here. Now we use whatever chart creation tools there are in your spreadsheet program. Here in Excel, you can click Insert, Chart, or if your ribbon is already in view, click on the Charts tab. Recall that we want to create an XY scatter plot, so I'm going to select Scatter and choose an option that doesn't draw any lines on my chart. Now, in creating graphs of your data, your science teacher may have told you to draw a best fit line through your data points, and we absolutely want to do that with our data. Excel doesn't offer us the ability to draw a best fit line in this part of the software, so we're going to finish up the rest of our graph and leave drawing a best fit line for the next part of this series. It's important for us to make sure that we include a title for our graph and labels for the X and Y axes with units. Let's see how we do that in Excel. I'm going to first make sure that I've selected the chart by clicking on it. Then, from the ribbon, I'm going to select the Chart Layout tab and click on Chart Title to fill that in. Title above Chart. Position versus time for rolling ball. Then from the ribbon, I'm going to select the Chart Layout tab. For the horizontal axis title, Axis Titles, Horizontal, Title below Axis, I'm going to fill in time seconds. And for the vertical axis title vertical, rotated title, I'm going to fill in position meters. This is starting to look like a pretty reasonable graph. It's important to think about the scale of your graph. Excel will try to make a guess about what kind of scale you want, but you may need to help it. In particular, you may need to force it to include the origin, 0, 0, as the lower left corner of your graph, which often helps us better understand the patterns in the data. In my example here, I have a data point there, so that's taken care of. To edit the axes, you can double-click on them to work through a list of options that are available. Here I'm double-clicking on the y-axis, and I've got various options for the scale that I can choose here. You can also right-click and choose Format Axis, right-click, Format Axis, or Control-click on the Mac. The only change I'm going to make here is to have Excel display vertical lines on the body of the graph, just as it has for the horizontal lines. Here are the horizontal lines. I'd like some vertical lines here. How do I go about doing that? I'll look around here a bit, but I don't really see what I'm looking for. You can try help, although the help for this particular product doesn't always succeed in helping me find what I'm looking for. In this case, poking around long enough and looking at the things in the ribbon reveals that there's a grid lines option for axes, and maybe that's what I'm looking for. Vertical grid lines, major grid lines, and you can see that they've been added in there. The last thing that we'll be looking at are a few of the ways that you can make your graph look a little more appealing compared with the auto formatting in the default chart. You can remove the series key from the side here by clicking on it and hitting the delete key. You can change the color or shape of the data points in the series by double-clicking on one of those points and choosing Marker Style, Marker Fill, and Marker Line from these options up here. I'm going to change the marker fill from automatic to maybe a nice red color. I'll make the marker line be a nice black outline, and the marker style, instead of these diamonds, I'll choose a square, let's say. And that looks like it's a little too large, so I'll decrease the size of those squares. There are many other modifications you can make in Excel, but this is a very nice graph for the moment. Here in part 4 of our Introduction to Spreadsheets series, we've seen how to set up data table and how to create graphs or charts of that data. The next video in this series will demonstrate how to add a trend line to your data points.